right. Yeah. Well, thanks to Jamie for today's talk. So as a real quick introduction, Jamie, you did your master's or undergrad and master's at Oxford,
I did
was
my
it?
bachelor's at Exeter in the UK, and then my master's at
Okay.
Oxford. Yeah,
Yep. Yep.
yeah,
And then Taiwan for a year and a half, working with
yeah, yeah,
Formosan black bears.
yeah. I was a wildlife conservation consultant in Taiwan, doing like bear tracking and on
Yeah.
wildcats and other stuff. So bit of camera trapping as well.
Yeah. Yep.
And
And
yeah,
now you've made
uh,
made your way down to Australia and Deakin. So you'll be
yeah,
talking about your PhD plans.
yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Awesome.
So yeah,
Take it
cool.
away.
Okay, cool, cool. Hi everyone, thanks for coming. Yeah, as Scott said, this is kind of me presenting my plan for my PhD. I just passed my confirmation last week, and my PhD theme is all around predicting animal movement and behavior using biologging. So yeah, we'll get in. I'll do an acknowledgement of country first. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're gathering. I'm on Wadawurrung country today, and yeah, pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and any indigenous peoples who may be watching or joining us today. So I'm going to introduce you to my friend. This is a stubble quail. This is a very widespread Australian native quail and the focus of my PhD. But surprisingly, very little is known about them, despite them being one of the most common quails in Australia. So I'll give a bit of background on what we actually know first. There's around 3.2 million birds in Victoria. It's a very rough estimate, and they're initially like a grassland bird, but up to 99% of that native habitat has been converted to agriculture or through urban development has been lost as well. So now they really inhabit a very intensive agricultural matrix of like pasture lands and monocultures as well. So like many other ground-dwelling animals and ground-dwelling birds, they're probably very impacted by pesticides, by living in crop monocultures, intensive grazing pastures, and also climate patterns like El Nino. And that should make them a species of interest and concern. But also, they're a very popular game bird here in Victoria. So up to 170,000 are harvested each year in Victoria. And basically, there were 3 papers researched on them in the 1970s, but there's been very little done since. So it's a recognized priority of the Victorian government, especially the Game Management Authority, who regulates hunting here, to find out more about them so that that can inform their sustainable management plans. So their key questions that have yet to be identified is finding out about the quail's habitat types and if they require adequate or enhanced management, understanding the impact of land use, so for example, harvest regimes on the quail's survival and recruitment, and then improving predictions of their breeding season timing as well. So they presented my lab with this project. We're already working with them on duck tracking as well, Australia's largest duck tracking survey. And they said, hey, can you help us find out about the stubble quail? So that's cool. And that begs the question of how we're going to do this. And as you might be able to gather from the little white devices on these quails, we're going to be using trackers. So obviously everyone here is a mood ecologist, so we won't dawdle on this too long, but like our sports watches or our iPhones, our smartphones, wearables, and yeah, that can log our activities, our movement, our health, absolutely everywhere these days. And as you guys all know, that translates through to biologging and devices we put on animals that are very similar. So we can get location data, which is what most of us are probably most familiar with, but also environmental data like temperature, depth, altitude, battery levels of your device. We can put sound like microphones on them as well, which we'll touch a bit later on. And for my PhD, I'm especially interested in acceleration data. So this is all really cool. The acceleration data, to go back to that, you measure a very high frequency, so many times a second, 10 times a second, 100 times a second, movements backwards and forwards, side to side, and up and down. So this is acceleration in 3 dimensions. And using these, for example, these cool birds are called oil birds. They were thought to live only in caves in the Amazon rainforest. And in this plot, they were thought to only live in the caves in these yellow pins. But once people put trackers on them and using these accelerometers, they found out that actually they spend up to 2/3 of their time outside of claves, digesting and resting in trees and in the forest and providing a really important seed dispersal service. So that was only found out through the use of accelerometers as well. So this is kind of what the data looks like. So with an example of a stork, when the stork is flapping its wings on the top in light blue, we have the up and down axis. We can see it's going up and down rhythmically quite a lot. There's a large fluctuation. And conversely, if we look at the bottom picture, when the stork is standing, there's much less fluctuation and it looks a lot more boring. And we can see that there's a very clear difference in the accelerometry signal from different behaviors. So we can visually distinguish this, but obviously if you're sampling something at hundreds of times a second for a continuous period of time, days or more likely months or potentially years, that is an absolute mountain of data that we cannot sort for ourselves. But this is where we can use machine learning to help us. So this is often based on supervised machine learning, where we give examples. So we'll say to the machine learning model, hey, this is what the data looks like when the stork is flying, or when it's standing, or when the cow is eating. And what this entails is once we've put our tracker on our animal and we deployed the biologger, we need to find our animal again and get synchronized recordings of the animal doing different behaviors. So that might be very easy if we're looking at humans or domestic animals like cattle, or even some wild animals like these wood ducks that are on the Deakin University campus with trackers on right now. But unfortunately, as I'm sure we're all too aware, most wild animals are really difficult to see. So in this field, just across the fence from me, I am absolutely certain there's a stubble quail with a tracker on it. The little box sensor in my hand tells me it's right there. It's downloading the data, but there's no way, I can't even see where this quail is. I know it's somewhere there, but if I can't see it when it's right in front of me, then how can I possibly find out the behaviors of this quail? So it's very difficult to get this labeled data and to then train our models to find out what the animals are doing. And of course, the animal kingdom exhibits a huge diversity in body shape and movement types, which would make it even more complicated to try and train some sort of model or get data to train a model to understand the behaviors of some of the animals that we're studying. And yeah, most animals we can't even get close enough to study. So then our problem is that we would like to do this kind of activity recognition to find out the animal's behaviors based on accelerometry and other sensor data, but we need to use methods that use less labeled data. For example, a k-means clustering could be an option. And the first part of my PhD is all about trying to find out the best options for animal activity recognition. So I'm going to run through my chapter plan really quickly. The first part is developing a kind of conceptual roadmap for generalizable biologging models. This is one I've added more slides today because I think it could be of interest to everyone. This is basically my literature review. I'm going to turn into a perspective paper. Then to get practical, I'm going to be comparing and evaluating some unsupervised machine learning methods for accelerometer-based animal activity recognition. So like the k-means clustering, and then some other similar deep learning models called transfer learning, basically doing the same and trying to see how those could be useful in this quest to do animal activity recognition. Then we're going to be applying this to the stubble quail. So first we'll be looking at the quail's population dynamics and their activity, the different behaviors they're doing, hopefully also identify their breeding based on accelerometry and GPS. And then after that, we'll be doing some more classic movement ecology with lots of GPS data, looking at the drivers of their habitat use and movement, and hopefully predicting their movement as well. So going back to this biologging roadmap, everyone here is probably very familiar, or at least knows of large language models like Claude or ChatGPT. These are called foundation models. So this is basically a model where you chuck enormous amounts of data at it. And then because they've been trained on so much data, you can give them a new problem and they can hopefully handle it with very little additional training. Claude and ChatGPT are kind of text-based models, but in the past few years, there have been foundation models for all kinds of stuff that is very relevant for biologging. So spatiotemporal trajectory models, that sounds a lot like GPS movement to me. Time series data, tabular data, and just predicting blanks in tabular data. Most of our biologging data is probably stored as tables, CSVs, Excel, etc. There are geospatial foundation models now. For geospatial data, there's bioacoustic ones to help identify species and different sounds that animals might make. And also for wearable sensors, especially in the human realm, which is very similar to activity recognition in wildlife. It's just in non-human animals. So this is all happening and it's coming quite fast. And just to break down a little bit more, there are different types of these models. So some of them are unimodal, which means they're specialized for only one type of data. So for example, maybe they're only trained on GPS movement data, whereas other ones are multimodal, which means they may jointly analyze, for example, accelerometry data and sound, or accelerometry and GPS. And some of them are called cross-modal, which is very similar, but they can translate between these different data types. So for example, sound to text, or accelerometry to text. Maybe I can give the model some accelerometry data, and it will describe in words what the animal is doing. That might be kind of more intuitive based on what we use ChatGPT and stuff for. So this is all cool, and especially what I was interested in was there's a lot of human activity recognition models, which is basically telling us what humans are doing, and they're solving the same kind of issues that we have in accelerometry based behavior classification for animals, namely a lack of labeled data and trying to find ways of being more efficient with our labeled data. And they're supposed to help improve the scalability and generalization of a model. So how well the models perform on data they haven't seen before. For example, it'd be hard to get data on quail, so they might be able to help with that. Or they could be scaled to help identify different behaviors of different species quickly without as much training time and training data, and then just help us interpret these models as well. So basically, they're good at generalizing to new contexts. So that could be new individuals, new people wearing a sports watch, or a quail wearing a tracker, different movement types. And if only we have more data to train these models, I think that they could be potentially very useful for us biologgers as well, working on different animals. We just need the data for it. So what I want to do in this perspective paper is explore what kind of infrastructure, systems, and research do we need to create these kind of biologging foundation models. I was initially thinking just for activity recognition, but I think it makes sense to consider them all together, considering most biologging devices we use collect multiple types of data that we would want to analyze all together. So I want to introduce the concept of a foundation model to biologgers in an accessible way, explain their potential for helping us, and then offer a roadmap to get there. So this is going back to activity recognition. Wildlife is kind of where human research is 8 years ago. We're kind of 8 years behind the cutting edge of the same research done in humans, kind of human biologging, we could say. So it's up to us to see what's happening in the human side and bring it over to non-human animals. I think some exciting potential applications of these could be obviously like predicting wildlife movements. I know this is something many of us are interested in, using step selection functions, and deep learning and stuff. But and it could have applications for activity recognition. But another thing I was thinking about, it could help us perhaps understand animal communication and social lives. I recently heard that sperm whales have been identified as having a 156-letter alphabet, complete with tones and really resembling the structure of a human language. And if we want to understand the meanings behind those words that they're saying, it'd be great if we could pair it with accelerometry data or other behavioral data, and perhaps we can find how different whale words are related to their behaviors when they're going up or down or hunting together, and then we can find out what the whales are saying. Or perhaps another application is precision health monitoring. Precision livestock monitoring is already a very big thing driving a lot of this biologging in domestic animals, often for health monitoring. And in an animal like the Sumatran rhino, where they're critically endangered and face issues with like reproductive cysts or cysts in their reproductive tract that hinder their fertility, that could be catastrophic if it's not caught early. So perhaps in some of these endangered species, it'd be really great if in the future we could integrate physiological sensors or activity just to continually monitor the health of some animals. That could be a really interesting use case as well. So this is my current focus. I'm aiming to submit a preprint ASAP, and I still need to discuss with my supervisors our kind of initial plan. But then I'm open to collaboration with people. So if this interests any of you, then please feel welcome to chat with me afterwards. So then we're going on to the more practical parts of my PhD and getting into some analysis. First off is learning from this unlabeled data. So I said it's difficult to get labeled data where I'm, for example, looking at the quail in the wild and describing its behavior to then pair up with accelerometry data. But I obviously am getting loads of accelerometry data anyways that doesn't have any labels. So can we use that in a better way? So what I'm basically talking about is using clustering algorithms like a hidden Markov model or a k-means clustering. So for example, back to this crane data or stork, we can see there's a difference between when the animal is standing or when it's walking. And if I had a clustering algorithm saying, put this into two groups for me, I would hope that it could do a good job at identifying when the animal is doing these different behaviors. So overall, in the literature, only around maybe 10% of studies have used unsupervised machine learning methods like clustering to do activity recognition. Most of them use these supervised models, but despite them having been used, there are no thorough comparisons of these different clustering algorithms for wildlife activity recognition. So what I want to do is basically compare these different clustering algorithms and identify which ones may be useful or not for us. So I have a few hypotheses. Number one, that deep learning clustering may be better than simpler methods like k-means clustering. That models also suited to time series data, like a hidden Markov model or hidden semi-Markov model, may also perform better than a k-means clustering because accelerometry data is time series data, of course. But for example, that a simpler model might be more energy efficient. Sometimes with these activity recognition algorithms, we can actually upload them now onto the biologging device so that it kind of pre-processes the data on board and doesn't have to send us the raw data and spend loads of energy. It can just upload the summarized version of what the animal is actually doing at each time. So that could be a potential use case later down the line. So I've already found, I've got a growing list of data sets. I've already found 11 species, each with 11 or more individuals and over 6 hours of labeled data. It's quite hard to, there's no kind of centralized repository for accelerometry data. Unlike MoveBank, it's kind of dotted around the place. But yeah, I've got data from vultures, from dogs, from sea turtles, some pied flycatchers, and yeah, I'm ready to start analyzing it. Then I'm going to be testing some different model groups. So classic clustering could be k-means clustering or density-based algorithms, and then compare that with some hidden Markov models. I also want to try a deep learning clustering, which I have seen used in a human realm, but hasn't been used for animals yet. And my control will be one of the most popular supervised machine learning models, like a random forest or XGBoost. I also want to look at the different model variables used as well. So we have the model, but we also have the variables. So for example, which model variables may be best to identify clear patterns in an animal movement, like the standard deviation of the z-axis or the frequency, etc. So this is all great, but the main problem is once you've clustered your data, you then need to make sense of the clusters. You still need to find out what behavior that animal is doing. And in some cases, that might be quite simple, but you don't want to have to try and guess this every time. Sometimes it might be still really useful if we can have some example data to inform our models, but we just want to use less and be reliant on it less. So this is where transfer learning comes in. So for example, I speak French, and if I want to learn another Romance language, like Italian or Spanish, it'll be easier because they're quite related to French, and I only need to fine-tune my knowledge. Compared with if I wanted to learn a completely different language like Arabic, it's going to be a lot tougher for me. So this is the same principle for machine learning, where we train a deep learning model on one task, for example, activity recognition in chickens, and then we have to fine-tune it for a different similar task, for example, on quails, which might be fairly similar to how a chicken moves. And one of the exciting things about this is that when you do this fine-tuning, you only need a small amount of actually new data, for example, on the quails, and you can still get really good activity recognition results. So that could be one way of reducing our reliance on getting all of this labeled data, which is really difficult for wild animals. So these pre-trained layers, like the chicken, is Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Terminator in this picture. And the custom layers, the quail data, and this is in this example, would be Mr. Bean having a chill and relaxed time instead of crying at his computer, trying to sift through all of this labeled data for quails. So this has started being used in animal research about 2 years ago, for example, on sea turtles. And in that case, it worked really well. They had data from one type of sea turtle, and they pre-trained the model and applied it to a new type of sea turtle, and it did a good job. They even pre-trained the model using human movement data, like from Fitbits and stuff, and it even did a better job at helping identify patterns in sea turtle movement. But there was another study that tried doing a similar kind of thing on seabirds, and it didn't go so well. So this is still very new for wildlife research. We don't know why it works in one case, but not in others. Is it because of the models they used? Is it because of the data set characteristics? How do we get it to consistently work? Is basically my main question. So I have a few hypotheses. My first hypothesis would be that the biomechanical similarity between two animals is more important when you're training a model than how related they are. For example, even though a vulture and an ostrich are both birds and they're both related to each other much more than a vulture and a bat, vultures and bats both fly. So if you wanted to make a model, for example, for vultures, and you had some bat data to hand, you could pre-train a model on bat movement, and it might do a better job at helping identify similar flying or resting behaviors in vultures than if you pre-trained it on ostriches, because they move so differently. So the sensor data you're getting will be very different. I would also expect that if you had a larger pre-training data set, bigger is better, maybe up to a certain point, and also that some variables are more important than others in contributing to model performance. For example, how big your data set is, or how many behaviors you have represented, how many individuals you have, etc. So I'm planning to use the same data set as my first chapter on unsupervised machine learning methods. And then I've got more detailed notes on the algorithms later on if anyone's curious, but in short, we'll be choosing and comparing a few supervised deep learning models like convolutional neural networks and gated recurrent units. Also trialing one self-supervised model based on human data that's already been used on a few wildlife species, and then comparing over an unsupervised transfer learning technique. With transfer learning, we're basically freezing some of the layers of the deep learning model. So the control is just using the same models, but without pre-training. We're just giving it the new data from scratch. So that's enough talk of confusing machine learning. I know it takes a lot of time and brain power to learn that stuff as an ecologist. How do we apply this all to stubble quail? So first up, we have to start catching the quail and deploying trackers on them. So the plan for the PhD is to put 100 trackers on quail. We've already put 5 on, and our animal ethics allows us to catch 15 more this year. So hopefully we'll start maybe next month with phase 2 of quail capture and deployment. And the 4th chapter is all about what the stubble quail do. So this is directly using the algorithms and the solutions we found from the machine learning chapters and trying to apply them to the quail accelerometry data. So it should be very durable to detect incubation in the quails. It's been done on many other ground birds like partridges. And I would expect that the incubation success and that carrying the full incubation to term is related to habitat quality. The quail should normally breed in spring, but if conditions permit in autumn, if it's nice, I expect they'll also breed in other seasons. And I would expect that their survival is related to season, sex, water, habitat quality, etc. So I'm already getting accelerometry data. This is showing how the quail are more active during the day, and they have very strict bedtimes. Around 6 p.m. they stop moving. So I'm already getting lots of data, which is great. And then we're going to be using these methods, for example, to create a time budget. These, for example, the clustering algorithms, or perhaps some sort of deep learning based model to help identify different behaviors like resting or flight, walking, feeding, incubation, etc., like they've done for this baboon paper. And then I know it's a big topic, Perhaps I'll be teaming up with one of the other people in my lab who's done a lot of survival analyses, but it would also be interesting to look at survival based on the quail data we have and how that changes over time or what might influence that. Then the final chapter is all about the stubble quail's movement and where they go and why. So this is much more on the GPS side of things. The previous chapter was more accelerometry data. This one is much more GPS. So I would hypothesize the quail are thought to be nomadic. So if you ask a farmer or a hunter, they'll say one day there might be 20 quail in your paddock, and the next day they'll all have disappeared. And nobody really knows where they go. I heard one was seen flying over the Bass Straits. I heard another quail based on banding data flew over 1,000 kilometers, but nobody really knows where they've gone. This is also the world's first stubble quail tracking study, because in the past trackers weren't small enough to put on these quail. They only weigh about 100 grams, so they're very tiny birds. So in general, I would expect that their movement is influenced by habitat productivity, but that their long distance movements may be influenced by farming practice. Maybe if the field they're in has been harvested, they might fly away, or perhaps by rainfall or wind. Maybe they can detect the rain in a faraway place somehow and decide they want to check it out. And also that they might use roadside edges quite a lot relative to availability, because these roadside edges are where most of this remnant grassland habitat is in this agricultural matrix. So they'll be using some environmental data. Thankfully, there's lots of satellite data available. So from Digital Earth Australia, Coturnix data, I've heard there's satellite images available on a 5-day repeat, which we might be able to look at when a field is harvested or not. If anyone here has any other data source recommendations, I'm very keen to hear them as I start this analysis. Also, this is the world's first stubble quail tracking study, so we're also just getting some amazing basic ecological knowledge and natural history information. So on their home range or their space use, how they explore the landscape, how they spend time in different residence patches, as you can see here, moving between different patches. And then for more prediction of where they go, I want to use some step selection functions, which I know some of you here are very familiar with, and to predict their movement. So from this example from one of Scott's papers, for example, the buffalo in the nighttime use herbaceous cover more, and they move to areas of higher canopy cover in the middle of the day. Perhaps we'll find some similar pattern like that with quail. Here's some of the first data that we caught from the quail. So for about 3 weeks after capture, they all just stayed in this one paddock. It was quite boring. We thought, there's not really much going on. One of them crossed the road at one point, but it wasn't particularly exciting, I must admit. And then all of a sudden, they started to fly away. So this is the most impressive quail, but he actually flew in a hop, skip, and a jump all the way over into New South Wales, directly over Gumbawa National Park. He flew about 100 kilometers over a few days. So that was really impressive. Some of the other quail were flying away at 3 a.m. in the morning. They've gone in all different directions, even though they're all caught in the same field. So that's really interesting. So most of the time, they don't really do much. And then sometimes they make these gigantic movements to a new area. So understanding where they go and why is one of the main interests of the Game Management Authority and us as well. So I have a publication plan. We don't really need to go through it too much. This is just for my COC. I'm shooting for the stars with the perspective paper. I want to get it in a nice, cool journal like Nature or Trends in Ecology and Evolution or something like that. As for risks, the first 3 are data-based chapters or desk-based, so there shouldn't be any risk to completion apart from potentially being scooped, which hopefully doesn't happen. And then chapters 4 and 5 with the quail tracking could be impacted by bird flu if the authorities clamp down on hands-on bird research. However, quail are very solitary birds. This type of quail only lives in groups of like 1 or 2. So hopefully they should be low risk, but we want to try and put trackers on them as much as possible. I do have some backup plans. For example, potentially trying out some of these up and coming foundation models on wildlife accelerometry data and seeing if they do a good job or not, or potentially looking at self-supervised models, which is a type of model I didn't discuss. That's kind of on the way towards foundation models. They basically don't really exist for wildlife accelerometry data yet, so any effort to share them is great. Or returning to my past life in Taiwan, we have some GPS collar camera data of some bears where we know what they were doing because we can see on the camera, and we could pair that with their accelerometry data and create some sort of activity budgets for them. Yeah, this is my team. I'm up here. I have two main supervisors, Professor Marcel Claassen and Dr. Hui Yu, both from Deakin, and also supported by Dr. Tobias Ross, who's also very great with bird research and survival analyses. And on the GMA side, we're supported by Simon Toop and Jason Fletch, who are also great guys. So yeah, thank you very much. If you want to get in touch, you can take a screenshot. My email's here. Here's my LinkedIn profile. I've also started recently a Substack newsletter writing all about Taiwan. This week I wrote about the bears in Taiwan. So that's called Taiwanabes. If anyone just wants to learn about the great biodiversity and culture and music of Taiwan, you can also check that out. Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.
Ooh, thanks, Jamie.
Cool, thank you. Okay, let me stop. I'll keep that for a second and then stop sharing. There we go.
Yeah, you might.
Cool.
Yeah, people might have questions about your slides, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's true. I can put the. Should I put the screen back on?
Yeah, maybe chuck it back on, and then we can flip through.
Yeah, that's a great point.
If you want.
Yes, indeed. If we have questions, then yeah, let's absolutely go for it. Okay. Cool.
Nikki's got a question for you.
Cool. Go for it.
Great presentation, Jamie. It took me back to a previous life working in a zoo where we had tags or trackers on animals, doing activity budgets. One of the things that I was really interested in was some of the mother-calf rejections, and we could get that out of the accelerometer data. Also, there was interspecies aggression, and we had eland calves that were kicked severely by another species, and we didn't know until we put the trackers on that it was individual zebras that were doing that. So it was really interesting. But the other things that it did sort of crop up in my mind as you were talking is with bird flu, it'd be interesting to see what a normal activity is, and then how that changes if bird flu does come through your study area. I know, some of the species that we had trackers on, they would go and sit in the sun to warm up, and equally others would sit in a more secluded area. So that would be a really interesting perspective with the current status of bird flu going through Australia. Thanks.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm amazed you can get so much interesting data on the elands and the zebras from accelerometry data. So that bodes well for my research plans. And yeah, I think it's a great idea. Bird flu is obviously very topical. So yeah, I guess the main thing is sampling the birds multiple times to check if they get bird flu or not. But I know there was also already one great paper on vultures and identifying when they catch bird flu and how their movements were impacted. For example, with accelerometry, they basically kind of self-isolated and stopped moving and just stayed on their nest, which was quite good. So that will obviously feed into then how we model the spread of bird flu or other wildlife diseases. So yeah, it would definitely be awesome to do if anyone has that kind of data. Yeah. Cool. Any other questions?
I was just wondering, Jamie, I have some technical questions, but we can save them for after. Yeah, super interesting. When they do those big movements, do they hang around there or do they kind of go out and come back?
Yeah, so most of them, they've kind of flown away once and then they've just stayed there. So they have just dispersed and then they go back to just sitting in a field and for like weeks on end. One of them did move up and then back down within quick succession, then they moved back even further up and then back down kind of in a triangle shape. So I don't know what was going on there, but most of them, but then once he's moved to that new area, it's just stayed continuously. So So yeah,
Okay.
I don't know if they're just looking for like a nice field with good enough conditions, and then if the conditions are
Mm,
good enough, they just decide to stay there until something bad happens. Um, that would be my guess if I was in the mind of a quail. But yeah, it's very interesting. But yeah,
yeah.
most of the
Yeah.
time they just seem to stay somewhere once they move.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it'd be interesting once you've started tracking them for longer to see if they, maybe they're like part of their kind of long extended home range and they have like
Yeah,
sites that they visit repeatedly or something like that. But
absolutely.
uh,
Yeah, it'd also be
yeah.
interesting because we caught like 20 in the same field, or we encountered 20 in the same field in May, and then we would put trackers on 5 of them, and then to see them all go in completely different directions is just really interesting. How they all decided to come to the same field in the first place, and then how many have gone in each direction. It's very interesting. So I hope we can
Yeah. Sure.
find out more about their social lives and social structure. Yeah. Cool.
Jack.
Okay, Jack, I see you got your hand up.
Yeah, I just had a quick follow-up from what Scott was asking. I was curious if they all were dispersing it around the same time, and if you had any theories of what might trigger that dispersal, like whether
Yeah.
the farmers might be harvesting or running more livestock or something like that.
Yeah.
And then I also just wanted to ask as well with the transfer learning models, I was curious if you had a hunch on which variables that you mentioned might be more important. Like, is it more important to have more numbers of animals or more representative behaviors, or if you had a hunch of the relative importance of those ones?
Yeah. Those are great questions. I'll answer the first one first. So that's if the quail dispersed at similar times or not. Yeah, they all dispersed within about a month of each other. So it wasn't within a few days, it was over the span of a month or so. One of the last quails was there for a few weeks after all the others had gone. I do know, I spoke to the farmer afterwards, and he said he's had more sheep in there and they've been grazing the ground cover a lot lower. So it was a stubble field when we went there, and it's got quite a lot of grass seeds and whatnot, but it's kind of got crops and sheep in the same time. So maybe the ground cover was just lower and lower, and some of the quail decided that they didn't like it anymore. That would be my hunch. And then as for the transfer learning models, and if I have a hunch at which variables might be more important, yeah, it's a very good one. I would say, yeah, maybe just like data set size. I think the number of behaviors would be good. I think it also depends, like some people have argued, for example, in human activity recognition, if accelerometry itself is a good enough sensor or data source, or if we need to look at other things, other data types. I think it also depends on what behavior the researcher has in mind. If we're looking at something explicitly movement-based, like walking or running or flying, then I think accelerometry could be a very good one. But if we're looking at something else that might be quite difficult to detect on accelerometers, then that might not be as good. So yeah, it depends on the data set quality. I think it'll be hard to kind of sift through the different data sets, but I would expect kind of the number and amount of behaviors you get will be important. Often in these data sets, there's a very big imbalance in the different behavior classes you have. So most of the time, for example, a data set of cats, most of the time it's just going to be resting for like 95% of the time. So 95% of your data will be on resting, and only 5% will then be on walking or eating or running. So then there's a difficulty in how you get the models to identify these rare behaviors as well. So perhaps maybe the data set balance or the behavioral balance within the data set. Not to say we should chuck out all of our abundant resting data, but yeah, I bet if you have a data set with enough examples of different behaviors, that'd be good. So maybe it's some sort of ratio that people can aim for. Yeah, I'm not really sure, but I'm certain that there'll be some. I just imagine like the Pareto kind of 80-20 principle, where 80% of your results probably come from 20% of inputs. I would expect the models can probably get by on, yeah, just some especially impactful variables. But we'll find out. Yeah, stay tuned.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Great talk.
Yeah. Cool, thank you.
I was actually interested. I saw Damien Farine on that you're on the call with. You're listening, and I mean, you've collected a huge amount of data on vulturine guinea fowl, and I was wondering whether accelerometry was a part of that, and that might be a kind of potential use data set for the transfer learning, considering the vulture and guinea fowl are kind of a similar running around on the ground bird. But if you're there.
Oh, hang on. Hey, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry, I just had to plug in my camera and microphone, otherwise, oops.
Good, yeah,
Here
I
I
didn't
am.
want to catch you off guard.
I was just lurking in the background. I hadn't set up any of my stuff. Yeah, so we've published we've got one paper published, and we've got one preprint up on where we used ACC and classification of behaviors to look at how, for example, the changes in foraging behavior are affected by, or how droughts basically affect changes in foraging behavior. So yeah, there's one thing that did strike me. I feel like your second chapter, I mean, that's just it sounds like a huge amount of work, just processing data sets with all these to investigate all these different approaches would take you months, if not years.
I think in reality they're going to be a lot smaller. This is why my aspirational first plan is try and find it. I think, do I need to use 11 different species? No. I could get by on less. We'll see how much we go for.
Well, one thing I thought as a piece of advice there would be that why not just use the published the published supervised learning outputs as your comparison, right? I mean, basically you're asking if can you use unclassified learning to improve on what people have spent a lot of time developing, because each of these studies that have been published will have the people doing that will have spent a year developing all those figuring out how best to do it. And I think your question about the power of unsupervised learning is, can you do as well as what the researchers themselves managed?
Yeah, that's a very good point. So maybe I don't even need to do any control studies.
That's it. That's your control, right? That's your baseline against which you're evaluating.
Bloody hell. Thank you very much. That's a great thought. Yeah. I do wonder how much work it will actually be. I've already reduced the amount of models I would like to have done already, but I wouldn't be surprised if they decrease. I think the deep learning based clustering will be interesting, but I don't know how complex it will be.
We tried that in the guinea fowl from memory, and we didn't find that it performed as well as the random forest.
Which one, like deep learning based clustering?
Well, yeah, deep learning, yeah, exactly. I can't remember exactly what we used, but yeah.
Okay.
You'd have to email Charlotte Christensen, who's the first author of those papers. She'll remember. She worked on the baboons before that. You cited Gail Feldman's paper. Yeah. So Charlotte knows.
Cool. I'll check out. Her name rings a bell. I feel like I might have met her at a. Yes, I met her at a conference in Oxford a few years ago. I think it was Oxford or something. But anyways, yeah. Cool. I'll get in touch. Yeah.
But if you want to use the guinea fowl data, we're happy to share it in a form that is useful.
Awesome.
For you, probably the raw accelerometry data is all on MoveBank, and I think Charlotte can probably give you the training data and the final labels as well, if they're not already in the paper.
Cool, awesome. That'd be amazing. Obviously, yeah, I think it was hard to find decent quality data sets with many kinds of behaviors, and then also on birds, kind of like a quail. I think a guinea fowl is not too dissimilar. So that'd be awesome.
As close as you're gonna get, yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Because I thought there might be loads of chicken data, but all the chicken stuff is private companies, right? So they don't actually really share that much data. And a lot of the accelerometry data is some of it there was a recent biologging benchmark data set, and some of the data sets in that were good, but a lot of them for the birds, it was, is it flying or is it not? And that's not too useful for what I would like to do. So yeah.
Well, one of the papers where we argued, one of the papers, the one that's published, where we talk about taking a more holistic approach to this. One of the things there we argue is actually simplifying it down depending on your question, right? So you might use different sets of labels depending on for different questions, right? So if we were in the follow-up paper, we're interested in foraging behavior. So we classified all the different types of things that are associated with foraging into one class to make it more robust, to make it simpler to predict.
Yeah.
So that's something else to think about, right? Like a huge focus in this space is about getting really precise predictions. But actually, most of the time, I was literally just talking to an honest student about this just before this started. Really, most of the time, that's not actually what we're trying to do. We're trying to answer biological questions. And so the paper that we published is making this argument that we need to be developing these models for the purpose of answering the questions we want to ask of the data, not describing exactly what the animal's doing, which is ultimately not really our aim.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah.
So this also, I think, speaks a little bit to this thing, which is that you're trying to not be necessarily trying to maximize the same thing for different studies.
Yeah.
And sometimes, classifying simply as like flying, walking, foraging, resting, basically that captures many of the main parts of an activity budget of a bird.
Yeah, agreed. I think, perfect is the enemy of good, as they say. I'm like, what's good enough? And like you say, what's actually relevant for your question? So that's why I think, like, even though the unsupervised models, you obviously have to kind of deduce your behaviors afterwards. But if it's flying, we can also pair that with GPS data, so we can get a good examples of when a bird is flying, or when it's resting, it's just not doing much. And then it depends. If you're looking at foraging, you might need specific examples of the bird foraging or feeding for that. But a lot of these foundational behaviors that we might actually be interested in might actually be achievable to kind of cluster into different clusters using a clustering algorithm. That's a lot of time saying cluster in one sentence. So have
a look at this holistic paper that we. Is there a chat on this thing?
Yeah, awesome. I will definitely read it.
Put it in there, which I think touches on a lot of things that you said. Chat, here we go. Look at that.
Awesome. We'll check that out.
Share it with everyone else too, if you want.
Yeah.
Cool. I can send it around in the debrief email.
Cool.
As well.
Yeah, thanks so much.
All right, thanks, Scott, for giving me a plug, for giving me a reason to speak.
No, it definitely seems like a lot of overlap, and definitely some good data that could.
Yeah, and also we have quail here in the aviaries if you want to come and put some ACC on.
Oh, did they have accelerometers on them?
No, they're just running about.
Okay, because that was one of the questions I got. So we have aviaries here at Deakin, and one of the ladies, Kate Buchanan, she does a bunch of research on like zebra finches and other birds. So she had a very good question for me. She was like, "Oh, why don't you get some quail in the aviaries and do this kind of research? That'd be the best thing to do transfer learning on for a wild quail, because stubble quail and Japanese quail look basically the same, and they probably move in basically the same ways." Which is a great question, but it would derail a lot of my other PhD plans, like that I would like to do. So
it would be a good way.
It would be great.
It would be great. Those finer scale like foraging.
Yeah, it would be.
Things.
Like I think especially for like feeding data. Yeah, I think it would be good. And there was some group in Spain, I think, who have got, and they published some Japanese quail accelerometry data, but some of the quail had accelerometers on, but they hadn't actually turned the accelerometers on, and they only had I think kind of unlabeled 10-minute chunks, and it doesn't seem that useful, I can't lie. So yeah, it'd be good to get some more quail data as well. I think it'd be fantastic.
Anyways, reach out. I think the PhD student is on the call, and he might reach out to you anyways.
Awesome, cool. Which is a PhD student, so I can write down.
Eddie.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm also lurking in the background. But yeah, feel free to reach out and we can have a chat about it. I'll send an email your way.
Cool. Sounds great. Looking forward to it. Awesome. Luke, I see you got a question.
Yeah, it's just a general practical question. So like for yourself or anyone that might know. Like I haven't worked with accelerometers before, but I'm really keen to. What are the trade-offs of using them? Like I assume they cost more to buy and have them on a collar. They weigh more. They're going to use more battery. I assume all those things. Like, can you like estimate the increase in cost and the battery usage, and also do you run an accelerometer constantly all the time, or do you kind of go, we're just going to do it for some small bouts and just get some understanding of behaviors? Like because I'm just thinking about even the GPS collar data, collars that we've got out on feral cats, and to get hourly fixes, they only last like a couple of months, and then they're or 6-7 weeks basically, and then they're dead. So yeah, just curious about those practical implications of accelerometers.
Yeah, that's a very good question. There's a few points then, I guess, from my mind. First, also, and especially as we get to smaller animals like these quails, the trackers we have, they weigh like 5 grams. So you have to be really conservative with what settings you put on and what kind of data you can get. We have some bigger ones and we have some really small ones, depending on how big the quail was. But we do sample the accelerometry data continuously. The data I showed you with the graphs, that was based on like oddbar, which is a kind of average. And you can set that in the trackers to be an average of every 10 minutes of accelerometry data or every 30 minutes. And then that's sent remotely. But the data transmission takes up a lot of the battery power. And we don't want our batteries to die. Fortunately, the quail, or for example, a duck, when it's sitting on the water, or the quail is in a field, their batteries are recharging very well because they have a little solar panel on these trackers. But I guess like for the cat, for example, it's not solar powered. It's just whatever you have in the battery that's that. So I think we're fortunate that these trackers have solar panels, so that will increase their deployment time. And then it's up to us to kind of see how the battery level is doing, and if we want to increase the sampling frequency or not of the oddbar or of the GPS, we can. And then to download the raw accelerometry data, what I can do is if I go back on the PowerPoint, I have this little box with me so this little box is called a hub. We're using Druid trackers.
Yep.
And they have these hubs. This is basically a Bluetooth sensor, and that would download the data directly from the collar or from the tracker. So the trackers can store the data for up to 3 months. And then, so basically what that means is later on in my PhD, I'm going to be driving all over Victoria quite a lot with this hub, trying to download the data from all the quails.
What distance? How close do you have to be to get that done?
I think it's supposed to be up to like 1 kilometer. I think in practice, I was walking around it with a field, and it might be more like a few hundred meters. So we'll see. I think with the quail, one of the cool things that we tried that worked is that is things called quail callers, which is basically just a speaker playing quail sounds, and that lures them in. So what I could do is, if I know the quail are generally in an area, I can put a quail, like the hub out with a speaker playing quail sounds overnight, and then come back in the morning, and hopefully all the quail have come close enough to download the data and save me a bit of effort running around the field and getting stuck. So so we don't actually, with the trackers we have right now, we can't directly upload the raw accelerometry data. If you have a larger tracker like on the ducks we track, those trackers have enough battery to directly upload raw accelerometry data as well, if they've got like a decent charge. But yeah, as you say, like logistics is always the trickiest thing about biologging. There's a lot of stuff to think about. So it's a great question. I hope I answered it.
Yeah, that's cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
And I'll maybe just jump in quickly. I collected some accelerometry data with GPS data during my master's, and basically like this collection of the measurement of the accelerometry is basically for free. Like it's just a passive sensor, so that doesn't use any battery really. It's only like the storage to memory and then the transmission that uses battery. So if you're like collecting your collars, like if they're not doing the like active transmission of data, then they're really like efficient to run the units themselves.
I can add to that too, that on the guinea fowl we actually didn't collect ACC for a number of years because it would have taken us literally like all night every single day to download all the ACC data, because it's a lot. Like the GPS might get, just for good times is 1 point per second, or a couple points every few minutes is what we get. But then the ACC is like 20 hertz or 30 hertz, so on 3 axes. So it's really a lot of data.
Yeah.
So it's data transfer of the cost.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty horrendous amount of data. I tried downloading some rough, like kind of shorebird accelerometry data, and it's like an 80 gigabyte file. I have no idea how to open that, to be honest. So yeah, it's a lot of data. Cool.
Any more questions? Well, that's about time. Maybe we'll let you off the hook, Jamie. Yeah, I've still got some questions, but I'll save them for another time.
Yeah, we can talk soon.
Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, I mean, I think you'll be busy for your PhD. There's plenty to do, but yeah, super important stuff, and really cool research.
Cool.
So
thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks so much for your talk today, and thanks everyone for showing up. And so the next talk is Maxime from Newcastle. So he's going to talk about his work with shorebirds with some kind of automated VHF and GPS and stuff. So yeah, another good talk next month, which will be in the last Wednesday of September. So hope to see you there. Thanks everyone.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks,
guys. Thanks, Jamie.